this is just about going. So just one sec.
It says it's going.
Oh, it does. All right, cool. Hi, everybody. I hear this is going, but I can't see myself yet. But welcome out. It's good to see you. We are here this evening with our friend Kathy Kirkpatrick. She is back with her newest American Prisoner of War Camps in that series, and this is American Prisoner of War Camps in Colorado. Yes. And we are also joined by Lynn, Arave, and his book is the next in the Images of America series, this one about Layton. So first, I want to welcome both of you and thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Lynn.
And I'm just going to go through a couple of upcoming events that we have in the next little while, and then I'm going to do a quick intro for both of you, and I'll turn the time over to you. One thing I'd like to mention here at the top is that both of these authors are Arcadia Press authors, and we're sort of treating this as an Arcadia Press author night, which is really great to have you both here. And there's an offshoot of Arcadia Press. Uh-oh, can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. Of Arcadia Press that we will have two authors from on the 1st. And this will be Nick Bagley, and his book is Abandoned Utah, and then Land Speed, Louise Ann Noth. And hers is another Images of America book, this one on the Bonneville Salt Flats. So these two events kind of tie into each other, and that one's on the 1st at 7 p.m. We do have an event on Cyber Monday, the 30th. This one is with Elena Dillon at her book, Mercy House. This is a William Morrow publication. I hear that has been optioned for a television series. So that should be interesting. And she's in conversation with Margot Orlando Littell, whose paperback publication of The Distance from 4 Points releases the next day. And so that is Monday, November 30th at 7 p.m. Finally, before Christmas hits, we have one more event on the 5th. This is a virtual event here on Facebook with Steve Creason. This one will apparently, he has many different sort of mediums that he's going to bring to this event, and may have some guest artists as well, but it will be infused with poetry. I think he's doing a short film and some music as well. So that will be on the 5th. So just a little bit by way of introduction for our two authors this evening. We've had Kathy in the store umpteen times. I'm not sure which in the series, what number this is in the series. Kathy, can you tell us?
I think 6.
6. So she has written American Prisoner of War Camps, 6 volumes in different states. I know that Idaho was one, Utah was one, was Arizona one, California?
California's 2, northern and southern. Arizona, Washington and Oregon, Wyoming and Montana. That's all.
That's it. Oh, okay. But this one's Colorado. I'm always excited to hear the differences between the ones in the different states, even how they differ from camp to camp. So that will be interesting to listen to tonight. Kathy's got a BA in history from Humboldt State, and she's authored many different things: basic genealogy, the descendants of Timothy Meeker, Italian prison of war in the continental United States, and others. She's delivered lectures on World War II POWs in America and World War II and enemy aliens in America, as well as proving the Jewish heritage of a Catholic Sicilian family. And then Lynn here, RV, his book is Images of America. This one about Layton. If you're familiar with Images of America, likewise, there's about 1 million different volumes. And this one lands on Layton, and then the one in a week lands on the Bonneville Salt Flats. But they each sort of, these are great little books because they're heavy on illustration, and they give a good sort of sneak peek into the area. They're not long books, but for the length that they are, I think they delve into some pretty good history. And so I'm excited to hear about that. Lynn has his bachelor's in journalism from Weber State, and he's lived in Layton for more than 36 years. And as Images of America likes to do, they always partner up this section of the country they're talking about with somebody who knows the country or that area well. And obviously, being a 36-year vet of Layton, Lynn qualifies. He's done extensive research into the city and the state. He has 2 Google blogs, The Mystery of Utah History and Layton, and Utah History, that highlight that research. And then he has a majority of the photographs that are in this book, he would like to be known, come from the Heritage Museum of Layton. So, my friends, thanks again for being here. Without further ado, I will turn the time over to you. And when you're ready, I will come back and moderate a Q&A session with those on the chat in Facebook. And for those who are tuning in or are here right now, go ahead and throw any questions you have in the chat, and I will ask them at the end of the presentation. And throw out there where you are, where you're watching us from. And happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And I'm going to go ahead and go silent and enjoy the presentation whenever you all are ready. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask Lynn, what's your oldest picture in the book?
Good question. I'm not actually sure on that. I think where Layton's relatively new to the community, it's probably the late 1800s.
Yeah.
The exact date, but this is Layton's 100th birthday as a registered city, 2020.
Wow. That's good timing for the book coming out. Too bad you can't have a bigger celebration.
Right, although I don't know, they delayed my book 5 months for the coronavirus. I don't know if your book had any delay.
Mine got delayed too. Yeah. It's hard to do a book when you can't go to work.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm curious where did you get this passion for POW books, this being your 6th? Where did that come
from? My grandfather was a prisoner of war during World War II, and was slave labor in northern island of Japan. And so it made me very aware of men who were prisoners of war and the conditions in which they had to live. And so my books at this time are all about camps in the US, which are a whole different story than camps in Japan. But it makes me feel good to know that we treated our prisoners a whole lot better. And I like to share those stories so that people know you can run an effective prisoner of war camp and still be humane and still have people come out with positive feelings. To the point that a lot of former prisoners of war who were held in the US immigrated into the United States in the 1950s and became US citizens. Yeah.
Well, I guess my blockbuster question though would be, do you think these camps in the US were necessary? Were they overkill to put so many?
Oh, okay. So you're probably talking about 2 different things. Prisoner of war camp are holding men who were captured in combat. So they are holding enemy
Okay.
soldiers, and they're not enemy aliens, which is a completely different thing. And
Okay.
yes, I'm not real excited about the whole enemy alien situation, but that does play into this Colorado book. There was a big enemy alien internment relocation camp at Grenada, Colorado. But the need for farm labor was so large over the whole of Colorado that some of them got put in different locations to work the farms. And these sisters had been sent to the internment camp in Trinidad, which is way southern Colorado. And while they were working the farms there, they met German prisoners of war who were working the same farms. And at that point, you get a little romance, you get a little girls passing the guys' maps so that the guys can escape the camps. And so when the guys are captured in New Mexico, then you not only have, this big press storm about all of this happening, because not only do you have escaped prisoners, you have girls who might have been committing treason, plus you have relationships between two different races, which at the time is just, oh dear, we're not even talking about that without getting very excited. So this leads to a treason trial, and the POWs who escaped testified at the trial on behalf of the ladies and said they seduced them into it. It was really not the girls' idea. And the girls effectively got imprisoned for about 2 years. And so by the time they got out of prison, all of their friends and relatives were being released from the relocation camps. And so that comes out to be a kind of a happy ending. So before I started writing this book, they were saying, well, you keep doing prisoner of camp books. This one needs something more exciting. Isn't there any sex or anything? And I've got a story about sex. So there you go.
So did they close the camps the same time they closed the other camps then when the war was over?
Pretty much. We had still a shortage of labor at the end of the war because a lot of GIs were still overseas. So we had to kind of juggle. But there were so many prisoners of war in the United States. There were about 381,000 Germans and about 51,000 Italians and about 5,000 Japanese that it takes a long time to ship all those people home. So they were here pretty much. They were in Utah for the beet harvest in the fall of 45. By June of 46, all of the POWs had been removed from American soil, except for the 5, I think, that nobody could find because they'd escaped. And some of them had to go to Britain or France to help rebuild. That was part of the surrender agreement, was that a certain number of people POWs had to go to those places to help rebuild those places. And they spent several more years there before they got home. But most of the guys who were held in America did go back to their homelands in 46, 46, a year after the war ended.
You mentioned that our POW camps, they were treated a lot better than other countries.
In our POW camps, we made it a point to follow Geneva Conventions, which pretty much means that the food and the lodging and the clothing equal those of American GIs. There are exceptions to that rule, and I do talk about it in the book, but I like to emphasize that, the more positive aspects of it. Yeah.
So they always had plenty of food and medical care.
They did. And for some of these prisoners, they had not been receiving enough food from their own countries, because in wartime you run out of supplies. And depending on where you are, you've got even less supplies. So a lot of these guys did come in malnourished and with some disease. And so each camp had a hospital, and we took care of the men who were sick, and we fed them all. And they, in Utah, we have a historian of the camp at Ogden who says that the average weight gain was 15 pounds. So that's significant. Yeah.
Because I would suspect they lost weight at camps out of the country.
No. As a general rule, they did really well here. There were some camps when the concentration camps in Germany and Poland were located. There were a couple of camp commanders in the US that cut rations, but only 2 that I know of. And yeah, but for the most part, we did treat the guys really well, and they did go home well fed.
So did they get Thanksgiving dinners at these camps?
They got Thanksgiving dinners, they got Christmas parties, they got halfway through the war, you know, Italy changed sides. And so at that point, half of the men joined units, Italian service units, that were considered co-belligerent. So they're considered allies. And so they get to work on more high security things like the weapons depot in Tooele and there's an ammunition place at North Hill Field. But they also got to have dances with the girls in town. And there was a bus that would pick up the POWs in Ogden and bus them out to St. Joseph's in Ogden for dances. And there were some romances that started up there. And so by the time everything was said and done, there were 5 women from Ogden who took troop ships over to Italy in the fall of '46, married their fiancés, and then brought them back to Ogden to raise their families. So there were some happy endings there too.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you got POW books on the list to do?
Do I have what?
More POW books you're going to do?
Yeah. The next one in the works is New Mexico and Oklahoma. And I'm hoping to work my way east and see how many people remain interested in the topic. I think it's fascinating, but we'll see how well it goes. Yeah. So Layton is 100 years old. It started as a farming community.
Right, it had to get away from Kaysville first. They didn't really get good representation back in the day. So it took a Supreme Court ruling from the US to finally separate in 1902.
Wow. So it was part of Kaysville from the beginning.
I think its original name was Kays Creek.
Oh.
And then once they changed the name of an LDS ward from the Kaysville 2nd Ward, I believe, or 3rd Ward to the Layton Ward, then that was the first use of the term Layton as a title was in a church ward. So the Kays Creek name didn't catch on.
Is Layton a person?
Yes. Christopher Layton, one of the early settlers and the first bishop in that ward.
Uh-huh.
Eventually he went into the state presidency in Davis County and eventually got called to Arizona to start another mission down there.
Wow.
So we had a town in Arizona called Layton for a time.
Not anymore?
No, I think that city didn't make it, but
that's so funny because now Layton is so much bigger than Kaysville.
right. And the whole reason for that is Hill Air Force Base.
Well, that's true. There were POWs at Hill Air Force Base, so I know about that. Yeah.
On the actual base?
Yes. Yes. On the actual base. Yeah. Some of them worked at the ammunition depot on the north end of the base. A lot of them were contracted out to work local farms. The same in Ogden, except also in Ogden, they were working at the warehouses, the supply warehouses for quartermaster supplies for all over the world to supply US troops with tents and uniforms and stuff.
Because I was surprised how many Japanese immigrants had farms in Layton and
That goes way, way, way earlier than that. Yeah.
right.
A lot of those Japanese people came in with the after the Transcontinental Railroad. The Chinese groups were coming in to help build the railroad. And then pretty much after the railroad was built, some of the Chinese families stayed, but a lot of them stayed with the railroad and went other places. And then they started needing more labor on the railroads, and they started bringing in more Japanese people. And a lot of those Japanese people had been working migrant farm worker stuff in Arizona and across the western states before that. And so there were some in Utah during the war who just kind of laid low and didn't get bothered and didn't get rounded up and put in relocation camps. But yeah, and so a lot of the Japanese families in town here came in with the railroad around 1900, which is interesting. Yeah.
I just know some of the Layton Elementary School pictures, you can spot a lot of Japanese children that I'd never thought of before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Some of the Japanese who were rounded up and sent to Topaz, most of those families came out of San Francisco, and most of them went back to San Francisco, but a few stayed. There are a few families in Salt Lake and then up into Davis County who had been at that camp at Topaz and decided there were business opportunities here in Utah that they could use to raise their families, and did successfully. Yeah.
Yeah, Hill Air Force Base tripled Layton's population from 1940 to 1950.
So that started with the war, pretty much, just before we went into the war. So just to 1950, but I know that base is still really active today. The population hasn't maintained, it keeps growing. Yes?
But I mean, just a good bedroom community for people who work in Salt Lake or other area places, lots of houses, and become a regional shopping center.
Yeah. That's true.
When Layton was smart some years ago, they annexed Hill Air Force Base land into the city.
Uh-huh.
Just a proclamation, but if Hill ever closed or downsized, whatever lands in Davis County up there would become Layton's eventually.
That's a really good idea, because you see what happens in other areas when bases close and downsize, and it's a disaster. So,
But Layton already has enough available land that one day it will exceed Ogden in population
wow.
without Hillfield's land.
Yeah. And just being a bedroom community, you don't think of big businesses in Layton. You think of it primarily as where people live and then go north or south to work. Interesting.
And there were some small Layton communities. There was a Laytona, which is the area where I live. That was its own city back in the 40s and into the 50s, but then it could never get enough water supply. So eventually it joined Layton City annex-wise. And then East Layton used to be its own town. And it wasn't until I think the late 70s, 1980, that it joined Layton City.
Oh, wow. I've only lived here 30 years, see, so I don't know all this about Layton. Wow. And most of that time's been sentenced Bolt Lake, so yeah, so we don't really know.
Layton Hills Mall opened in about 1980, then that kind of spurred a whole bunch of retail and restaurant development in town.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a real focal point. You can't miss that mall just right off the highway. Yeah. So does your book have the photos like the now and then photos? Or how's your arrangement?
No, I did it by subject, so the chapters are their early years, farming and ranching, sugar factory, transportation, World War II and the Air Force Base, school and churches, community life, Wasatch Mountains, businesses, and then modern cities. So I didn't have room to do that, but that would have been
Yeah.
interesting. But Layton
Well,
was
the
the way
next
that,
book. Yeah.
like, the grid system that Salt Lake was. So
Yeah.
some of the streets go any which way, but
Well, that's nice. I like having that kind of organization. Some of the books just seem like such a hodgepodge, and it's hard to find your way through it. So I'm glad you've organized yours into topics, so it's easier to find what you're looking for. Because I do use some of those books, the Ogden one and one other I can't think of that, for background and to see what was going on in the community when the bases were active there.
then one of Layton's most well-known streets is Gentile Street.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually has 3 or 4 LDS churches on it now. The new LDS temple under construction technically is on Rosewood Lane, not Gentile, but the
it's
north side
there.
of it is Gentile Street that
Yeah.
curves off. And no one quite knows where that name came from, but one story is there was just some non-LDS person on the west side of town, and so they started teasing him, that he was a Gentile, and so the name caught on. Some outsiders I've seen, they call it gentile. They don't even understand what Gentile is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's even got a Kingdom Hall Jehovah's Witnesses church on Gentile Street now.
Wow. It's become kind of a major street. That's
Right.
Yeah.
It's a east-west corridor for sure. It goes clear out to Syracuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they actually continue the name on some of their signs, even though I think they list the numerical equivalent. They still have Gentile out there as well.
Wow. It's funny how little things can get totally lost in the history and you have no idea where it came from. And there's really an interesting story to it. Yeah.
I didn't understand in history books that they're just a snapshot. That, as I've searched all newspapers, you find the most interesting stuff when you're looking for something else, but there's sure a lot of a gold mine of what if possibilities, of what if the freeway had been here instead of here and that sort of thing.
Yes, it would have made a huge difference. Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, Ogden was the one that led the charge to get Hill Air Force Base developed. And I think they assumed the main entrance would dump into Ogden.
Yeah.
But what actually happened, the main entrance dumps right into Layton, the south gate.
Yeah.
I think that kind of shocked them, but
Oh, well, yeah.
this isn't in my book, but I understand the original reason of why Hill Air Force Base was ultimately picked as a base was a lot of the early pilots that didn't have radar or guidance. They had to go by sight.
Mhm.
They knew River Canyon had a strong breeze out of it, so you'd never have fog on that hill there.
I didn't realize that.
along the Weber Canyon that, oh yeah, that flat hill there would be perfect for a base. So
Well, they were right.
sold
Yeah.
on it. I sold them on it
Wow.
because that was just called the Sandridge back in the day. It was just grazing land. It was basically nobody really much living there.
Yeah.
Flat hill.
Wow. And now there's so much going on there. Wow.
Yep, these new planes are mighty louder than their predecessors, these new jets.
Yeah, I've heard that. But having those guys on the base is good for the local economy too. So can't complain. Yeah.
Yeah, I still think Hill's probably the largest single employer in the state, probably, but
Probably. Yeah. Wow.
yeah, I think my book would suit some people for a good holiday gift if they know anybody that has roots in Layton or has an interest in Layton. Then where it just came out October 26th. Somebody's not likely to have it, and younger generation probably wants everything online, but there's a lot of pictures in the book at least.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be digitized later. I wish Arcadia was digitizing books now, and I have told them that because I think that would spread it around a little more than it is getting around now. But maybe in the future. In the meantime, we're saving these books, these pictures, and we're explaining them when they show up in the books so that people can know what's going on.
Right, because I had a lot of photos that the museum had, but it took research by them and me sometimes to fill in the blanks of who are these people.
Exactly.
The cover photo here, you've got these people here, and it's only an idea that they were probably family members of somebody in the bank at the time. Nobody knows exactly who they are.
Wow.
Maybe somebody will come forward now that the book's out, but
Yeah, maybe now when they see them on the cover, they'll let you know. Yeah, that would be great. I have on my website posted a lot of pictures from my travel and my research regarding Italian cemeteries, but American military burials in Italy, and as well as some of the POW pictures too. And every once in a while, somebody writes to me and says, "Hey, you've got the headstone of my great uncle there. I've been looking for that. I didn't know where it was." Or there's one woman who wrote to me and said, "Oh, you know that those bakers, the Italian prisoners who are bakers standing in front of that oven, my father is one of them." And so those are just wonderful stories to hear because I don't have names for those people in the photos. They just, they were all collected and saved at Weber State, but most of them don't have names on them. That's the Utah book.
that came out how long ago?
2 years, maybe. Yeah. Oh, it's here. I can. Yeah, 2018. Yeah.
I have a question from the chat. If you would
Yes.
like to field it, this actually is for Lynn. And Lynn, I'm guessing you may know this person. This comes from Taylor, and Taylor would like to know what year the Layton Kaysville case went to the Supreme Court.
We just talked about that.
I think it got resolved in 1902. I don't remember how long it was at the Supreme Court, but 1902 is when they said, yeah, Layton can separate, but they have to pay some of the back taxes that were part of the original request by Kaysville for them to separate.
Was that set in motion many years before that? Were there people there that saw that coming?
Yeah, I don't know if they saw it coming that it would ever go to the Supreme Court itself, but they just thought Layton should be its own community if it's not going to get represented politically or what they wanted. So
I have a question for you, Kathy.
Yeah.
You said you're going to start making your way back east with your
Yes.
books.
Yes.
Were there concentration camps in a majority of the states?
Oh, yes. In fact, every single state in the 48 plus Alaska and Hawaii except Vermont had prisoner of war camps
That's
for a total of 1,210.
what I wish you could see my face now. My jaw just went, what? I can't believe it.
Turn on your camera.
Here it is. This is what it looked like.
Okay. Oh, good, good, because that's most people's reactions, because nobody talked about it. The camps you weren't supposed to talk about the camp in your neighborhood because it was, it was a secret security thing. And then people just never talked about it after that. And after the war, almost everything got auctioned off, all the barracks and the other buildings, and unless it was an active military installation like Hill Field. And so then people just moved on and didn't talk about it.
I'm sure there are camps out there that are obviously wiped off the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any out there that you may not know about that may have been around?
Yes, and that's part of this process. I did write a book about all the camps in the US 8 years ago or something. But as I've started focusing in to do these books for Arcadia so that each book is smaller and has more photos and has more stories and is more specific to a certain region, I am finding camps that I didn't know about before. And yeah, so there will be more by the time it's all said and done, I'm sure. Yeah. Some of them are temporary, seasonal, to bring in a certain harvest or something. And some of them are big with, dining halls and theaters and laundries and all that stuff. And some of them are on military land, and some of them are on land that was purchased just to build a camp and then disappears after. So there's a wide variety.
That's really surprising to me to hear that number of all of the states.
Yes.
Surprising.
Yeah, every single state except Vermont.
Except Vermont.
Yeah.
On Vermont.
Vermont had big ammunition factories to make up for it. So.
Now, are there any sorts of lingering negative effects of these camps at all, besides what might be genealogical or within familial?
Okay. Those are the biggest, most painful lingering effects is children who originated at the camps and ended up being adopted out and ended up not knowing who their father was. And I deal with some of those, a couple every year. And sometimes we can track down the fathers, but most of the times not. Some of those couples did get married and raised those children. Some of those women married other men, but held on to the children, but most of the children disappeared. Other than that, no, not a whole lot of negative, because for the most part, we followed Geneva Conventions. For the most part, we took good care of them. For the most part, they got mail from home and were able to send mail to home and were able to keep communications open, to the point that in the 1950s, there were a bunch of people who came in and settled as US citizens. But even into the 1970s and 80s, there were former prisoners of war coming into the US on summer vacations to show their kids where they had spent part of the war.
Oh.
And yeah, and the local news crews would come out and interview them and everything. It was lots of fun. And then, and there were still, I think I went to about the last reunion in Texas about 2009. And there were 5 guys there who had been POWs in that camp during the war and came back, and lots of good community between the community of the former POWs and the people in town, lots of good relationships and lots of correspondence, and then following the war with the reunions and everything, everyone sharing stories and lots of communication. So overall, lots of good relationships. And I think that had been a major factor in political relations with those countries, Germany, Italy, and Japan, after the war, is because there is a kind of a grassroots connection between the countries from the POWs who were here.
I mean, it almost sounds like the way you talk about the relationships that were forged and the sort of the camaraderie that was built between the prisoners and the townspeople, that like it almost more positive things came out of it than not.
I think so. Most of the stories I'm seeing are positive. There were, of course, people who never accepted having enemies in their neighborhood and were very vocal about it. But for the most part, there were friendships, there were good relationships. It was good for the most part.
And Lynn, I'm going to get right to you in just one second, but one more question for you, Kathy. Were there many of these camps on Native American reservations?
There were a couple, not very many. The biggest impact on Native American reservations was enemy alien relocation camps. And they were put in without the consent of the tribal leadership in every single case. But as there were a few, I can only think of 3 military POW installations on tribal lands.
And did that have to do with the fact that they were their own nations?
We didn't treat them like they were their own nations. We said, we're going to put a camp here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And Lynn, I'm curious what it was outside of, well, first, you've been in Layton for 36 years, but did you grew up in that area generally?
Yeah, I grew up in West Weber County.
And-
Hooper.
Oh yeah, Hooper. Yeah. Yeah. My dad's family is not Hooper, but they're all from Echo. They all come out of Echo. So, and they all, Ogden and a little bit of that northern Davis County and some, not western Weber, but the other way. So was it, what fueled the fascination to study that area? Did you go to college to get your journalism degree in order to sort of be a historian for that area? Has this all been recreational for you?
No, see, I went to Weber State, but then eventually I got hired by the Deseret News. I was a sports writer there for 3 years. And then they had openings in feature and pushed me that direction. And then the next thing you know, I was in city desk 10 years later doing everything but crime. reporting, and all of a sudden I thought, history, this is really great. I'm going to start researching some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then when old newspapers became so searchable versus the old microfilm that your eyes would just burn with pain of too much looking, it was so easy to type in a keyword and boom, there you go.
Yeah.
I kind of picked it up as I went.
And your blogs. You want to just talk just a second about your blogs?
Yeah, one of them is called Mystery of Utah History. And see, for a couple of years, I had a front page history column every Friday in this Ogden Standard Examiner. And then they did some changes, and that one by the wayside, but I got back with the Deseret News, and I still have a monthly history column in Deseret News. And then I'm putting all those columns as I write them in that Mystery of History blog.
Good.
But a lot of fourth and I think it's seventh grade that study Utah history.
Yeah.
They use my blog according to Utah State history because it's a lot of alternate history you won't find in the books. It's
Nice.
listed there.
Nice.
Well, that's a cool thing.
And then the Layton one is just a lot of supplementary material that's not in the book that I found in all newspapers and elsewhere.
And is it one of those situations where it probably is this way for both of you, where it just becomes that rabbit hole that you'll never, ever, ever, ever get to the bottom of?
Absolutely.
Which I think, you know, that's probably the way it should be, right?
Yes.
Well, my friends, I don't have any other questions in the chat. I will say this to everybody who may come across this later. This will stay up on our Facebook page for many moons, and you can come and if you have any friends, then come watch it. Anyone can watch it anytime. But I do want to mention again how much I appreciate you being here with me. I know it's a tricky time, it's a tricky week, you know, doesn't seem like most of us are probably going to be overrun with relatives this week anyway. So I'm glad that maybe you and I could share a minute together. I want to remind everyone out there that Lynn Arave's book is America, or Images of America, Layton. And it was nice meeting you, Lynn. We hadn't met before, but I'm happy you could join us. And then our good friend Kathy, her newest is American Prisoner of War Camps in Colorado. Both of these titles are available through Weller's. We'll be throwing up the link there. You can link straight through to our website and order it that way, or you can always call us at 801-328-2586. So once again, a big thanks to both of you, and to the rest of you, be kind to each other, wear your mask, and happy Thanksgiving. I hope it's great as it can be. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Good
Thank
night.
you, Lynn. Good night.
Thanks.